Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Knos webinar, Can Colorize Disinfectant Improve How We Clean? I'm Rachel Sparks. I'm the VP of Marketing for Knos, and we're so glad you've all joined. Today, our webinar is kicked off by Dr. Bill Rutala, Professor, Division of Infectious Diseases, University of North Carolina School of Medicine in Chapel Hill, and the co-founder and director of the statewide program for infection control and epidemiology in North Carolina. He's an advisor to the CDC, the FDA, the EPA, and the FTC, and has been published in over 500 studies and papers on the topics of infection control and prevention. Kevin Tian, a co-inventor of our Highlight technology and our Chief Scientific Officer of Knos, will be following with his presentation. And with the time remaining at the end, we'll have Kevin available for any of your questions. So please use the Q&A function along the bottom of your screen to submit questions, and Kevin will try to answer any of them, all of them, by today's presentation's end. So to begin, I'm going to share Dr. Rutala.
Good day. My name is Bill Rutala, and for the next few minutes, we're going to talk about how the environment leads to transmission of healthcare-associated infections. Let me begin by mentioning that this presentation is provided in part by Knos. Now, this slide essentially reviews for us how epidemiologically important pathogens are transmitted via the environment. As many of you know, there are several epidemiologically important pathogens that are transmitted via the environment, and they include organisms such as methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, vancomycin-resistant Enterococcus, and Clostridioides difficile. The reason that these organisms are transmitted via the environment is that surfaces are contaminated at a relatively high frequency with these epidemiologically important pathogens. For example, if you were in a room of a patient that was colonized or infected with MRSA, about 25% of the surfaces would be contaminated with MRSA. We know for these pathogens that these pathogens have a survival that essentially varies from days, weeks to months. So essentially they survive well on environmental surfaces. We also know that if you have contact with these surfaces, that results in hand contamination. Of course, disinfection of the surface reduces that hand contamination, and disinfection, of course, reduces contamination on those environmental surfaces, which reduce hand contamination. And for those reasons, disinfection reduces healthcare-associated infections. For surface disinfection, it's very important that we understand there's two essential components. One component is the product, of course, of the disinfectant. The disinfectant has to be effective against these epidemiologically important pathogens. And the other component is practice. We have to thoroughly apply the disinfectant to all surfaces so that the surfaces are no longer contaminated and hand contamination doesn't occur from touching that surface. And only when we reduce that microbial contamination by effective surface disinfection will we reduce healthcare-associated infections. Now, this particular slide identifies two studies that have defined the relationship between microbial burden and HAIs. That is, if you reduce the microbial burden, you reduce healthcare-associated infections. And that's what these two studies demonstrate. Now, the problem is, or at least one problem is that rooms are not adequately cleaned and disinfected. There have been a number of studies which have shown that either at discharge or terminal clean, as well as daily cleaning, we have suboptimal cleaning or thoroughness of cleaning the environmental surfaces. So only maybe 30% of the surfaces in the patient room are disinfected, leaving 70% of the surfaces contaminated for the next patient. 30% are disinfected, 70% remain contaminated. And that is the reason for why the next patient entering that room is at increased risk for the previous patient's pathogen. Let me look at one study with you. It was a study that was done using C. difficile, and essentially what they found was that if you or I were to enter a room and the previous patient had C. difficile, our risk of acquiring C. difficile would be 11%. If we were entering the hospital and the previous patient did not have C. difficile in our room, our risk would be 4.6%. Our risk is 235% greater because we were entering the room and the previous patient had an epidemiologically important pathogen, in this case, C. difficile. That increased risk has been found not only for C. difficile, it's been found for MRSA, VRE, and multiply resistant gram-negative rods. And the reason for that, of course, is that healthcare workers can touch those contaminated surfaces and transmit those pathogens from those surfaces to patient, or the patient can self-inoculate. That is, they can touch a contaminated surface and bring their hands that are contaminated to their eyes, nose, and mouth and inoculate themselves. So that is the reason that effective surface disinfection has to be done. That is the reason that we need thoroughness of cleaning. And that is the reason, of course, that we need to reduce microbial contamination on environmental surfaces. Well, what can we do to improve surface disinfection? And now it's up to Kevin to tell.
So Kevin, let me hand over the reins of this to you, okay? And
great. Thank you so much, Rachel. And can you just confirm that everyone can see this?
I can see it very clearly. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay. So hi, everyone. It's great to be with you today. Just to introduce myself again, my name is Kevin Tien. I'm the co-founder and chief scientific officer at Kinos. I'm also a fourth-year medical student at Harvard Medical School. And so, like many of you, I've worked in a lot of clinical settings and have seen firsthand some of the unique challenges of maintaining a safe healthcare environment for patients and for each other. And so I'm really excited to walk you through our highlight technology, our Kinos story, the evidence base around colorized disinfection, and the kind of impact we're going to have on protecting our patients from infection. And so, as Dr. Rutala noted, healthcare-associated infections inflict a really severe burden on our healthcare system, and there is a direct link between environmental contamination, particularly of touchable surfaces in the hospital, and nosocomial infection. And so one of the fundamental issues is the prevalence of human error in this process. And so to reiterate some of the key statistics that inspired the highlight technology for hospitals, greater than 50% of surfaces are not cleaned properly. And that renders patients at a 5 to 6 times greater risk for infection. Now, we do know that targeted cleaning interventions can have a track record for success, up to 80% reductions in infections if properly implemented. Think about the Ornstein study in 2011 showing that implementation of bleach wipes reduced C. diff by 85%. The problem is, how do we actually ensure effective cleaning every time? How do we enhance both product and practice to achieve perfection? And so I'm really proud to introduce Highlights, a product that enhances the ability to use existing disinfectants. And it's designed as an additive that either colorizes bleach spray or wipes to ensure that users visualize and achieve maximum surface coverage while they're cleaning. And through this real And so the Highlight technology was designed for 2 formats, sprays or wipes. And originally, we were inspired to develop the sprays technology in 2014 in response to the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. So a major problem during that epidemic was ineffective, improper disinfection of PPE, of the care environment, of other fomites. You know, with the case fatality rates as high as 90% in past outbreaks, every preventative step should have absolutely no room for error. And those were the parameters that we were designing around when we started this company. And so our solution was to make the invisible visible. And so with a method of colorized disinfection, we wanted to enable workers to feel really confident in their safety and to really maximize how well they were disinfecting. And so this color fading mechanism was designed as a real-time feedback indicator, not only to prevent staining, but to also signal disinfection requires a wet contact time, that Ebola requires some certain amount of time to actually kill. And so this was our first product, Highlight for Bleach Sprays, designed to dissolve rapidly in standard bleach solutions that were used throughout the epidemic. And you can see how it colorizes the solution, helps it adhere to surfaces, and fades away to clear. Here's a side-to-side comparison of bleach alone versus with highlight. Left is bleach alone, right, as you can see quite visibly, is with highlight. And there's a stark difference in visibility, coverage, and careful technique when you can really visualize what you're doing. Whereas spraying bleach unaided is more of a cursory approximation. With highlight, the end user is much more visually attentive to missing spots, any areas of poor coverage, and does a much better and more thorough job as a result. This is really empowering.
Kevin, we have a freeze up. We can't hear you anymore. Looks like we lost Kevin temporarily. He is actually at Harvard Medical School. So we'll see if he can log back in a second. Mark, in the meantime, has asked, does the color fade upon drying or after an amount of time? And how does that time match with the prescribed dwell time? So yes, highlight for bleach wipes actually does fade in about 3 to 5 minutes. So from the time of application to when it dries is about matched to the time for dwell time. Hey, Kevin, I was just filling in with answering a question while you were logging back in.
Yeah, so can never get through one of the Zoom meetings without technical issues. Okay, so hopefully I didn't get cut off too much, but I was discussing about how, during our first field testing in West Africa, we really saw that this colorful disinfection concept actually reveals instances of human error, and that in that way, highlight was a really unexpectedly useful quality control test. So this video is from the first time we sprayed highlight in Liberia. We had spent months perfecting the formula. We had made sure that it had vivid color when it was sprayed, and then that it faded to clear appropriately. And so we were really excited to show this off in front of the entire staff at the Ebola treatment units. 10 minutes later, you can see what we saw. The color just didn't fade. It completely stained this tent. And so at this point, we were panicking. We thought we had flown all the way to Liberia with a formula that didn't work, that didn't fade. But we knew that we had really meticulously designed the chemistry to work for a specific concentration of bleach, the concentration of bleach that's required to be effective against Ebola. And so we immediately got to troubleshooting. We asked the staff, hey, show us how you make your bleach solution. And they said, oh, it's simple. We make, for every liter of water, we add 2 tablespoons of bleach powder. But when we actually saw the process, you can see these little spoons are nowhere near a tablespoon. They were given the wrong measuring utensils. And to our horror, that meant that during the entire outbreak, they were actually using overly diluted bleach to disinfect. The concentration of bleach was nowhere near what it was needed to actually inactivate Ebola virus. And I think we were fortunate to been able to been in that position to introduce highlight in this concept of colorful disinfection, that we were able to catch this mistake. And we really, honed in on this in this APIC publication in 2018, that the fading time of highlight is really dependent on the concentration of chlorine. At low concentrations, you might not even achieve full fading before the solution dries up. And so that was a really key insight from our field testing in West Africa. And so at a second Ebola treatment unit, this time this was in Monrovia, the capital, we discovered another dangerous safety lapse. And so this time we had to work with spray with highlights. This time the solution faded properly, which we were really relieved to see. But when it was time for them to take off their PPE, they discovered that the skin and their scrubs underneath had been stained blue. The implication here being that the PPE suits they were wearing were not actually waterproof throughout the entire epidemic. They had assumed the entire time that any wet stains that they saw was their sweat, but only with introducing highlight did they see that the issue was far more fatal than they expected. And so this was an ETU, an Ebola treatment unit that saw a lot of some of the highest worker fatality rates. We were really lucky to catch the issue and alert their leadership to to issue more robust PPE. And so ultimately, this concept that we had field tested and developed out of the Ebola crisis saw really positive reception from these healthcare workers. We ended up publishing these findings in the Journal of Hospital Infection. And in fact, a study that was published in AGIC by Kurt Donsky's group at Cleveland VA Medical Center actually specifically quantified this improvement in visualization. And so they had 9 healthcare personnel participate in a blinded comparison of ability to correctly identify which hospital services were sprayed with bleach alone versus bleach with highlight added within 30 seconds of applying it. And so what's important about this study is that at baseline, workers are only able to identify where bleach has been applied around 30% of the time. That's a really fundamental inefficiency of current disinfectants. Their transparency hinders your ability to actually complete a thorough cleaning without even knowing where you've already treated. So how are you able to distinguish where you treated and where you might have missed? But with the addition of highlight, that accuracy was increased by 50 to 70%, and workers could successfully identify areas that bleach was applied to over 95% of the time. One good common question we get is, how does the highlight color work on dark surfaces? And one of the test surfaces was actually a black tabletop. You can see that the baseline visibility of disinfectants is already quite high here, which highlight does appear to modestly improve upon it. So what we discovered is that on black surfaces, any type of liquid or solution tends to have kind of a sheen or a glare or reflection that provides some visibility on its own. So of course, this is a lot more difficult to discern on other surface colors, and that's where highlight makes the most impact. And so here's an example of what that looks like: the stark difference between applying bleach on a hospital surface versus bleach with highlight. And so briefly, I want to go over the third-party lab testing that we confirmed to show that adding a chemistry like highlight to multiple types of bleach doesn't affect contact time or log kill against multiple pathogens, including Staph aureus, Pseudomonas, even human coronavirus. This is a study published in AGIC in 2018. And we also conducted a primary direct skin test to show that the chemistry that we're adding does not actually increase or affect the toxicity profile of the disinfectants you're already using. So I'd like to transition now to how we've adapted our solution towards tackling this issue of hospital-acquired infections. And so, as Dr. Rutala noted earlier, the 2 essential components to effective surface decontamination are product and practice. And so product itself is relatively straightforward. As long as you're using an ideal disinfectant with sufficient antimicrobial activity, you should be good to go. But there's often a gap between having an effective product and actually using it effectively. And it's that gap in human behavior that we want to address head on. And so whereas post-cleaning devices like UV lights or e-misters can be effective as a supplement, you'll still have instances where you require good, effective human cleaning with good technique, good practice to wipe away any bioburden. Similarly, quality control tools like ATP or UV trace are great as a retrospective check, but you can't scale that up to every square inch of a hospital surface. We want at Kinos to really empower human behavior with real-time feedback and bridge that gap between product and practice. And so I'm excited to introduce highlight wipes in this video. As you can see, highlight wipes are designed as a reusable dispenser lid to your currently used bleach wipes. It has a rechargeable cartridge containing the highlight solution. And every time you dispense a wipe from our solution, it's imbued with highlight and the technology to enable disinfection, you can see, and enable this training with every use. And as you can see, highlight is adaptable with multiple brands of existing bleach wipes on the market. So let's take a closer look at some of the evidence base around highlights for bleach wipes and colorized disinfection. And so as you can see, there's a pretty stark improvement in visibility and coverage when you use highlights. The color really enables effective wiping practice, wiping technique in good practice. And you can see in this example how obvious it becomes when a wipe is poorly used. You get streaks, you get gaps in coverage, missing spots. But with highlight, we found that it provides this really crucial training with every use so that workers are empowered to achieve good coverage each time. And so as you can see, with multiple passes, you're able to adequately cover the entire surface. There's a really interesting study out of AGIC in 2011 called 3 Swipes and You're Out. And its main hypothesis is whether multiple swipes or wipe passes could affect bioburden removal. And so they actually seeded different plates with different pathogens, including Pseudomonas, Staph aureus, or MRSA, Candida. And they used wipes with different chemistries like hydrogen peroxide, quats, saline control. They found actually that saline alone, essentially friction alone with saline, could achieve pretty substantial bioburden removal, particularly with 3 or 5 passes. And this effect, of course, is improved upon if you use an active chemistry like hydrogen peroxide. But the overall point is that multiple passes might be really important to achieve this necessary friction to achieve bioburden removal. And so a technology like Highlight is designed to enable visualization and encourage thorough wiping. In fact, a study out of Cleveland VA Medical Center found that thoroughness of cleaning could be significantly improved with Highlight for bleach wipes. And so they measured thoroughness of cleaning through percentage of fluorescent markers removed from 4 different surfaces. And they compared bleach wipes, as you can see in the white, versus bleach with Highlight. And they saw an improvement in fluorescent marker removal across all the surfaces. And so what's important here is that we envision Highlight being a daily, frequent tool that continuously improves technique, continuously trains your workers, and continuously helps to improve cleaning efficacy. And so I mentioned that this continuous concept because we've seen in the past how cleaning improvements really cannot be sustained without systemic changes and constant feedback. So this was a study published in AJIC out of Nebraska Medical Center in 2012. It was a QI project that was aimed at improving EVS performance, and they measured this through UV fluorescent marker removal on 15 ICU objects. And so results were shared, face-to-face every month, actually, which improved cleaning rates from a baseline of 52% to 85% or 83%. But once they transitioned to a quarterly system of feedback, no longer meeting workers face-to-face every month, that cleaning score dipped back down to close to baseline. Only when they re-implemented monthly face-to-face meetings did they restore this cleaning efficacy improvement. So imagine having this feedback not just quarterly, not just monthly, but every single time you use your disinfectant wipes. And I want to quickly mention another value add that we found with our partners is that one important issue with bleach wipes is that they are known to be corrosive on certain materials, including hospital equipment, furniture, stainless steel, and that can increase repair and replacement costs for hospitals. Not only that, but damaged surfaces are known to act as nitises for pathogens. So you see increased bacteria retention in surfaces with pitting and etches. So we actually ran a study to quantify how corrosive bleach wipes were on stainless steel with bleach wipes alone versus bleach wipes with Highlight. And you can read the study published in JHI in 2019. Well, we basically found that both brands of bleach wipes cause significant discoloration and tarnishing and mass loss of these wipes. Whereas when Highlight was introduced, we were able to actually show that mass was preserved and corrosion rate was reduced. In essence, these components of Highlight that we've included not only can act as anti-corrosive agents, and you can ideally safely implement bleach wipes in your facilities with less of a concern for materials compatibility. And this is just the results showing the % change in mass between Clorox with Highlights, PDI wipes, and PDI wipes with Highlight. And here are some scanning electron microscope images to show the differences in the corrosion and etching between the control with Highlight and with significant etching seen in the bleach wipes by themselves. And so finally, we implemented Highlight into a real world setting at Boston Medical Center. And we tested its ability to improve ATP scores. The baseline data was actually collected over a year in 2017 in 11 different units. And overall, 947 data points were sampled from high-touch surfaces. That actually yielded a 5.7% failure rate based on an RLU value, a threshold of greater than 50. So basically, out of these nearly 1,000 data points, almost 6% failed to be cleaned. But when we introduced Highlight in a pilot study, that failure rate actually decreased to 0 over 73 data points. And so we noted that the average RLU, the relative light units in the baseline data, had a really large standard deviation, which suggests that there are outliers with extremely high ATP scores, basically surfaces that have completely been untouched, whereas Highlight was able to ensure that every single high touch point that was assessed was actually cleaned and passed the ATP threshold. Finally, I just want to say that at Kinos, we're really interested and our mission is to empower change at all levels. You know, the process of cleaning can be such an invisible process at many levels. Cleaning is so hard to see, not just literally, not just physically when you're wiping, but also figuratively in terms of how its importance is noted in the hospital hierarchy. So, you know, I noticed this during my hospital rotations at CHA. And during the pandemic, I helped write a perspective in the Annals of Internal Medicine to really focus on empowering and shining a light on our EVS workers. And you know, we hope that tools like Highlight can continue to empower EVS workers to take pride and be more confident and do a better job at protecting patients. And so just to conclude, I'm really excited to introduce Highlight for Bleach Wipes and really excited to help address this growing problem of healthcare associated infections. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm sure there are a bunch. And
yeah, we have a few. I'll read a few off to you real quick. So Robert Deck asked if there are any surface types that the colorization does not fade on.
Yes, that's a great question. So bleach wipes are designed to work on specific surfaces, and there are those that bleach wipes should not be used on. So porous surfaces, for example, are typically not indicated for bleach wipe disinfection. So in those types of surfaces, for example, let's say you were to get Highlight on a bed linen or your scrubs, you know, you would either get discoloration from the bleach or you'd get some residue of the color on these porous surfaces, but it does wash right out with water.
And Mark asks, is the EPA okay with the addition of Highlight to bleach at the time of use?
Yes, so this was something that we had discussed with them from the very inception of the company. From the EPA side, we are classified as an adjuvant because we don't contain any active ingredients, nor do we make any pesticidal claims. We're not interfering with the active ingredients. We're not interfering with the agent that's actually causing that's actually disinfecting the pathogen. So from the EPA standpoint, we're not, you know, there are no regulatory hurdles.
And a few people have asked about whether Highlight's being developed for other disinfectants like quats, like hydrogen peroxide, and even peracetic acid.
Yes, yes. So, you know, one of the overall goals is for Kinos to be able to expand this technology across, you know, all the disinfectants that are being implemented in hospital settings and other settings. For now, we have a full launch of the bleach wipes product, and you can expect to be able to use that and pilot that in your hospitals now. Our next upcoming product would be quats, and you can probably expect to see a launch of quats sometime early next year. And we're happy to keep anyone informed for further developments on that front. In fact, actually, you know, a lot of our customers have elected to switch from quats to bleach for training and routine disinfection. We're happy to share more information on that front. And then further down the road, you know, hydrogen peroxide would be something that would follow soon after.
Excellent. This is a great question. What's the shelf life of the colorization?
Yeah, so the device itself, the Highlight Wipes device, is designed to be used over the course of a year, whereas the cartridges and the solutions are stable and inert on their own. So typically, you can expect them on the scale of years for this to be stable on the shelf.
Excellent. And someone who actually used an early version of Highlight in powder form about 3 years ago mentioned that they did have some absorption to older equipment that might have had some like micro fissures or cracks. Can you talk about the evolution of the product since then?
Yes, absolutely. So you probably were using an earlier spray version that's, you know, we've continued to iterate on the product since then to make it compatible with multiple different surfaces in order to fade consistently and properly on a range of different equipment. But you highlight an important point I wanted to talk about. Residue, or as we basically refer to when Highlight leaves behind a blue trace that can be typically wiped away. There are 3 rare instances when residue is an issue. The first is when you're not actually using bleach. So if you added Highlight to, for example, like an isopropyl alcohol wipe, the as we saw in West Africa, not using the proper disinfectant agent is going to cause the coloration to not work properly. Or if your bleach is expired. So we've actually had multiple cases where adding highlight to an expired bleach wipe, unknowingly expired, caused some residue to be left behind. So this really alerts you, serves as a quality control check to see if you're using not only the right agent, bleach, or whether you're using an agent that's still efficacious, unexpired bleach. The second case is when residue on surfaces can occur due to holding onto, or due to the surface kind of holding onto the color. And we see this in instances where there's still some gross contamination on the surface. So whether it's like a sticker label residue, or a spot of old dried blood, or some crust from food left over, these gross contaminations or gross debris will actually cling onto the color. And that's actually an alert for you to continue to apply friction to remove this gross bioburden, as that can be quite a nidus for bacteria. And then the third is as I mentioned earlier, when you have porous surfaces not meant for bleach disinfection, that might hold on to the color, but that will wash out with water.
Okay, great. So we also have a question, is highlight available for a non-healthcare consumer?
Yes, I mean, we wanted to target hospitals as that was kind of our founding mission. But we're very, we've actually seen a lot of interest in highlight, particularly during the COVID epidemic, of highlight being applicable in other settings. And so now we're exploring things like travel and transit, food and industrial and waste sanitation. So we're happy to connect if it can be applicable in other settings.
Excellent. So we're a little bit over the 4 o'clock mark, and we've gotten to, I think, all of the questions. I'll give just a second more before we wrap up. And I'll let everyone know that the webinar is going to be made available for on-demand viewing after this. We'll have that posted on our website, but we'll also send out an email follow-up to all of those who registered. So if you think you'd like to share it with someone else who'd like to learn a little bit more about highlight, that'll be available very soon. So at this point, I think we've gotten all of the questions answered, and we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I'm sure this is a little bit running late for some people who had just allotted 30 minutes, but thank you so much for your time today, Kevin.
Of course. Thank you for having me, everyone.